Good morning. I'm David Dahl, currently the General Manager for Rota Unica Agriculture. Some of you may remember me from my previous position as the Tree Nut Farm Advisor for Merced County with the University of California Cooperative Extension Service. Today I'm going to talk about my experience in managing development of almonds within Iberia, and particularly focusing on some of the climate and irrigation issues related to that development. I'm hoping along the way to draw some parallels to California to help you understand that although there are some similarities, there also are some differences. I thought a logical place to start is to provide an overview of the climate of Iberia. Now, for definition's sake, Iberia is the combination of Spain and Portugal, and it forms the peninsula on the southwest corner of Europe, with France located to the northeast once you cross the Pyrenees. The climate of Iberia is classified as Mediterranean as well as oceanic. The Mediterranean climate means it has hot summers with most of the rain falling in the winter months, and the oceanic is very similar in precipitation, except for it tends to be a little bit cooler due to the influence of the Atlantic Ocean in the northern part of the country. Now, most of the almond production is based in what we call the central part of Spain and Portugal, which is typically Mediterranean climate. But we also see plantings along the coast near Murcia, as well as in the north central part of the country near Zaragoza. These areas of production have lower water demand than what we typically see in California, somewhere around between 42 and 52 inches of total water demand, and due to precipitation, applications are much less, ranging from 24 to 30 inches. The rainfall patterns across Iberia also vary. And this is similar to what we tend to see on the west coast. The gradient tends to move from the southeast corner, which very low rainfall, around 200 millimeters, to the northwest corner with very high amounts of rain, somewhere around 80 inches total for the year. And this is due to that oceanic influence from the Atlantic, which is just to the north. The mountains also receive substantial amount of snow, which then of course is melted and provides runoff into the rivers during the spring. Now, most of the tree nut production areas within Spain and Portugal are in these regions that receive somewhere around 400 to 600 millimeters of water per year. This is around 16 to 24 inches of total rainfall. The rain as it falls into 13 major river basins within the Iberian Peninsula. Perennial agriculture occurs in about 6 of these, with 3 within Spain and 3 basins shared between the Spain and Portugal border. As you can imagine, this creates some tension between the two countries in regards to government regulations. Now, the remaining basins are utilized for specialty crops, and overall crop diversity across the Iberian Peninsula is very similar to what we see within California. The irrigation infrastructure across Spain and Portugal differs dependent upon the terrain. In low-lying flat areas, there's gravity-fed water, which is open channel, very similar to what we experience and see in California. As the terrain becomes more hilly or more undulating, we start to see pressurized systems that deliver water to the field. These systems tend to be more modern, and of course there's an increased expense to the water delivered to the field. There's not a lot of reliance within both Spain and Portugal on wells. There's a lot of regulations associated with it, and this includes licensing, the development of the well, the inability to extract groundwater from certain basins, as well as very low flow within wells after they are established. So we're not capped just based upon a regulation, we're also capped on the ability for that well to produce water. Lastly, there is some desalination within Spain, and that's mostly used for vegetable crop production near Almeria in the southeastern part. Now let's shift our focus to Portugal. Within Portugal, there are 5 major production areas that vary in both climate as well as in rainfall. In the south, we have a semi-tropical area that receives roughly 20 inches of rain, more or less. And as we move north, we see an increasing amount of rain and a decreasing in temperature until we arrive in the north, which is a relatively mild region that receives about 44 inches of rain between October and June. Most of the agricultural production within Portugal is based around 3 river basins, including the Douro River, which is known for its grapes, the Tejo River, which is known for specialty crop production, including tomatoes, walnuts, apples, and so forth, and the Guadiana, which irrigates most of Alentejo, and this provides the production for olives as well as almonds within the region. Interestingly, farming in Alentejo is a lot like farming in the Sacramento Valley of California. And when we overlay the maps, we can see that the degrees latitude actually line up as such. The production area within Alentejo starts around somewhere around Sacramento and extends up to Chico. And as we move into the northern production areas, we're actually are approaching the California-Oregon border. In contrast, the large major almond production area within California, within the San Joaquin Valley, is located at the southern edge of Portugal and extends into North Africa. Now, this degrees of latitude impacts the amount of light that's received on a daily basis, especially through the growing season, in the spring and fall in particular, which influences both the temperature as well as the humidity experienced during these times. I think it's easy to draw similarities between Alentejo and the Central Valley. In fact, we probably could even say it's Portugal's Central Valley. It has a dry Mediterranean climate, meaning that it has high heat during the summer, and as well as most of the rainfall tends to fall between September and May, more or less. The major difference is there's a lot of terrain elevation changes. So we start off at sea level, roughly 0 feet, and then we have hilltops that tend to extend up to 2,500 feet above sea level. Now this region is dry, as I mentioned. It has very limited water basins, and as such, it's serviced through an irrigation district known as a DIA. Now, a DIA manages the Alqueva Reservoir, which is on the Guadiana River, and it forms a reservoir about the size of Lake Oroville. This provides water to roughly 200,000 people, 250,000 people, irrigating about 400,000 acres of crops. The water is delivered pressurized through closed pipe systems, and the pressure can range from 1 to 3 bars depending upon parcel size. Larger parcels tend to have what they call unpressurized water, which is delivered between 1 to 2 bars, and smaller parcels tend to have water delivered at a higher pressure between 3 and 4 bars. And this, of course, is provided as a guarantee or a tag on the specific hydrant. The amount of water that's provided to the field is really managed by pipe sizing, and this prevents your ability to irrigate beyond the respective footprint that you have within the parcel size. The cost structure is very similar to California, roughly about $45 per acre foot for the price of water within an unpressurized system, and of course various fees for standby, environmental management, etc. The major difference is pumping costs within Portugal are much higher, and energy is about 35% higher than what is typically observed in California. Now, as I mentioned, the soil conditions within Alentejo are different, and a lot of this has to do with the terrain changes that we tend to see. We see a lot of highly eroded hillsides with a lot of layering within the soils, especially in the valley. And these soils have been farmed for thousands of years, typically to grains, and therefore they tend to be relatively nutrient poor. Very low potassium, very low phosphorus, and many are acidic due to just the lack of inputs onto the fields to maintain good agronomic conditions. So we tend to see a lot more application of soil amendments as well as deep ripping to break up some of these layers to help us maintain good water infiltration and other agronomic practices required for almond farming. The terrain features impact how we irrigate in Portugal. It's very common to have very significant elevation changes across the field, anywhere from 30 to 40 meters from the top to the bottom end. And all this has to be considered within the irrigation design. To manage this, we're utilizing smaller sets, typically 5 to 10 acres in size, using flexible polyethylene pipe for secondaries, as well as automated control valves to help us manage the site-specific variability. And of course, all these systems are utilizing drip with pressure compensating emitters, with very few micro sprinkler systems found within the region. Automation is considered essential within Iberia, and this has a lot to do with the terrain. The downside of this is that we're fully reliant on having a pressurized system, meaning that we're pulling water from the hydrants or from a charged reservoir in order to keep the water flowing into the system. The good thing is that since so much of this is used, the systems are a lot cheaper to install than what I typically have observed in California. We're seeing these systems typically as mono cables, meaning that we're putting a cable along the top of the pipe as we install to plug into the valve. Now, we do have radio controlled or cellular valve controlled bodies, but it's not as common just due to the increased expense associated with it. And where we do see our point of radio control is at the actual pump station, where we're able to access it with mobile technology to turn on and off the pumps. Now, all all stations that we're seeing in Portugal are utilizing VFDs, and that's really just to deal with the fact that we're having variable amounts of water being applied across the field at any given time. The water-related challenges we have within Portugal are very similar to California. They mostly deal with weather variability as well as water management. So we have essentially a natural factor that includes decreased winter chill, increased intensity rainfall events, as well as drought. And you can see some of the impacts of the increased precipitation that we're seeing with relatively large storms that tend to come in and drop several inches of rain at a given moment. Now, the water management is something we control as a society. And in Portugal, I think it's a little bit more complicated just due to the changing government regulations. There's a lot of lack of consistency, a lot more favorable environmental policies, and just a lack of enforcement of agreements between water treaties between Spain and Portugal create some inconsistencies in the amount of water available. This is then coupled with mostly irrigation districts that are managed by political appointees. And this may mean that it may not have the farmer's aspect or the farmer's perspective as their top priority. And it can lead to decisions that maybe aren't taking into account what's best for the end users of that amount of water. How we manage these challenges on the farm is not necessarily unique. As everyone knows, agriculture is about water, and therefore every action that we have on a farm keeps our water resources in mind. We subscribe to the permaculture belief of slowing it, spreading it, and sinking the water into the ground. And to do this, we utilize three strategies that start with farm development, include crop selection, and as well as utilization of the better farming practices to help us maximize our water resource. Some of the on-farm strategies we have to mitigate weather risk is very similar to California. Reservoirs, wells, interconnected systems help us essentially increase the volume of water that's available to use on our farms. Due to the rainfall, however, we have some different practices, such as deep ripping to break up the limiting layers to allow for better drainage, cover crops to help slow water and reduce erosion, contour leveling and cutting berms to spread that water in order to get it into the soil. And then we have as well as soil amendments to help increase infiltration, especially calcium-containing soil amendments. One thing that's a little bit unique to Portugal is we tend not to fully develop our farm footprints. This has a lot to do with environmental policies established by the EU, but it gives us the ability to have an increase in the amount of water available to apply. So essentially we're only developing 85% of our farm, but we still have 100% of the water, and we concentrate that water onto areas that in time of need. Crop selection is one of the primary means we can use to optimize our farm water use. We screen our crops for high water use efficiency, trying to find somewhere around 0.85 liters of water requirement for every kilocalorie produced, which is essentially 15% more efficient than the world average. This includes almonds, pistachios, as well as other grains that we look to utilize. We also, when choosing a perennial crop, tend to look for trees that we can utilize deficit irrigation strategies without taking a severe impact on yield. Now, when it comes to farming practices, they tend to vary. But one thing that we tend to value a lot here is that first timing of irrigation. Due to the amount of spring rain that we tend to have, we may find that we don't need to apply our first irrigation until the end of April or into early to mid-May. And this impacts how we fertilize, including the use of granular applications through the spring. To help us with this, we utilize modern technology, which includes aerial imagery such as AirWatch, aerobotics, soil sensors like Centec sensors, as well as tree monitoring, stem water potential, calipers, etc. We try to utilize a sustained deficit irrigation program to give us more flexibility in our water use, and we target essentially 85% of the estimated ETC of our almonds to maintain the highest water use efficiency as possible. Soil amendments help us maintain water infiltration, we reduce infield compaction, and of course utilize cover crops to maintain soil organic matter as well as reduce tillage. In conclusion, the challenges in Portugal are very similar to California. I think the biggest difference between the two systems from my observation is the ability to have more site-specific control of the irrigation and water applications within our installed systems here. These smaller subunits as well as automation really help us target water and nutrients to specific soil types and allow us to work with that system to reduce water applications by several percent depending upon crop need or potential irrigation strategy. I think this would have a lot of value coming into California as one, to improve distribution uniformity, two, to provide a little bit more refined control. Overall, it's been a good experience to be here. And of course, the change from the technical side to ranch management has been challenging. I've learned a lot, I felt, in the process of installing systems and utilizing it to grow trees over the past couple of years. And I hope many of you have found some benefit in comparing and contrasting the two systems. Thank you for your attention.